Hey guys, this is John, and welcome to part 2 in my series on fundamental chess concepts. In part 1, we discussed undefended pieces and strategies to increase your sense of danger, and now we'll be moving on to piece coordination. So let's say you're going along in your chess development, you feel good that you're reducing the frequency of your blunders, you're not giving away pawns and pieces left and right. That is a good step, but that alone will not win you games many times, even though last time I mentioned that it can get you very far. One important step following that, once you've eliminated these basic blunders, is to start thinking about your entire army and the way that your pieces and pawns interact with one another. So in this video, we're going to use the same format, aka I'm going to be playing some players on chess.com in the rating range that I'm lecturing to here. I'd say the beginning and improving player rating range. And I'm going to be focused very much on my piece coordination and making the most of my forces. So making sure I don't have pieces that are clearly bad, making sure that I'm not shooting myself in the foot as far as the development of one of my key pieces down the road. And also, I'll be building from the last video and really watching the undefended pieces for both me and my opponent. Okay? And I've chose a rating range similar to what I was doing last time. So I'm going to look for a player in the 500 to 1400 range. And I'm going to do a 10-minute with a 2-second bonus game. And let's see who we get. This is all done live. The way I record these videos, I pretty much just go straight through. And it seems like people really like this format. So we'll see who we get. This is a player. Okay. So we have an 1155. And again, in these videos, just don't take anything I do totally at face value, because I may be playing in a style that's slightly different from what is probably optimal, but I'm going to be playing in a straightforward style and one in which I think will highlight these themes that we're trying to learn. So he's playing the King's Gambit accepted. This might have fit well under the undefended pieces lecture that we did last time. I'm going to play just a solid move here, bishop c5. This does not take his pawn on f4. But I like this move because it gets my bishop out. And if ever I want to play pawn to d6 later to defend this e5 pawn, I won't be blocking in my bishop on f8. Okay, so this bishop c5 move, it's an active move, but it's geared towards avoiding trapping the bishop on that square, should I ever want to defend the pawn, which I am going to do now. And by the way, him taking on e5 on the previous move would have been a blunder in view of queen h4 check, which we'll look at after the game. So now I'm going to play d6. Already I like my coordination in regards to this dark square bishop. I think it's got a good diagonal to operate on, and it's not inhibited by any of my pawns. Still, he is unable to win a pawn, but because if he takes on e5, I take back with my d-pawn. He takes with his knight. I would have queen to h4 check with a fork. Okay, so he plays bishop c4. Likewise, this is a good move because he wants to play pawn to d3. In order to have more center influence, open this dark square bishop, maybe have it defend f4, but he doesn't want that bishop blocked in on f1. So that's a real common thing I see in games of beginners and improving players, is that they trap in their bishops unnecessarily. So I like that he did that. I don't want to take this pawn because he can play pawn d4 and attack my bishop with tempo. So I'm just going to play a simple move. I'm going to play knight c6, develop, and also defend this pawn. I hope in this video we'll get to talk about the relationship between the knight and the c-pawn, and also sometimes the knight and the f-pawn on the other side of the board here. But the knight and the c-pawn have a special relationship. I would say in general, in e4 openings for both black and white, it's not as important that this pawn hasn't moved should the knight be developed to c6. Or for white, it's not as important that the c2 pawn be moved if the knight's going to develop to c3. But in d-pawn openings, that becomes more important for reasons that I'll get into later. So knight to c6, and let's see what he does. We're both decently coordinated right now. Really, the mantra of coordination is not getting too focused on one particular piece or a single operation, especially early in the game. Because that's a clear avenue to having a lopsided position, and one in which like you're completing development on one side of the board but completely neglecting your forces on the other side of the board. You don't want that. You want to be giving ample play to all your pieces rather than just a few. Okay, so this move a3. When it comes to coordination, if you're having trouble developing and coordinating your pieces, especially early on, take a look and see if you're making too many pawn moves. I'm not trying to criticize this guy's a3 move too closely because it is a semi-useful move. It does give him use of the b4 square. But people who routinely have development problems and kind of have this problem of focusing on a single operation, they move a lot of pawns in the opening. And I'm going to play knight f6 here, just developing a piece with tempo on his pawn on e4, attacking it. And to be quite frank, I think players under about 1200, especially on chess.com, but just 1200s in general, they make way too many pawn moves in the opening. And for you guys, if you're in that rating range, I would adopt the motto that you only want to move pawns if it facilitates your piece development. Okay, so only moving pawns if it facilitates your piece development. And once you have your pieces out, your big guns coordinated, then you can start focusing on making more pawn moves. So I like what he did here. He went back to knight c3. Good developing move, defending his pawn on e4. So here, I'm going to consider two main moves. I'm either going to castle or I'm going to play bishop g4. I like both moves. Castling certainly is not a bad idea. Get my king to safety early on. I like bishop g4 because I am wondering how he's going to respond to the pin. But let's castle first. Let's leave our bishop in reserve, although I think bishop g4 was just as good. And if I were him, I would play pawn to d3 now. That's a pawn move that's acceptable for him to make because it does open up his bishop. He prefers to play b4. Not a terrible move as far as pawn moves go, because it does come with tempo. However, if I were giving this guy advice, I'd say, maybe cut it out a little bit now and start trying to complete your development. Okay, so knight d5. This is a good example of getting too focused on a single piece. So he's already made two moves with this knight in a pretty short time frame too. Like he played knight c3 just a couple moves ago, and already he's bringing it into d5. I think he's getting a little too focused on my bishop on b6. I think he wants to win that piece, and I think the reason he wants to do it is because he wants to prepare castling short. But he knows that he can't do it when my bishop has such a gorgeous diagonal leading all the way to the g1 square. Now, think about our first video in this series on fundamental chess concepts, so undefended pieces. By virtue of him playing knight d5, has he left anything undefended? And yes, he has. Probably I wouldn't have been asking that question if he hadn't. But I'm going to play knight takes e4 because that's a free pawn that he gave me. My knight is undefended on this square, so I had a good look around and made sure he couldn't take advantage of that in any way. But I think it is a free pawn. Now here I can capture in two ways, c takes or a takes. I'm going to take with the a pawn, capturing towards the center. I like the fact that it opens my a file as well. He took my pawn in the middle. Now, which way to take back? I like both captures. I think I kind of like knight takes a bit better. And even though I'm moving my knight for a second time, it's for a good cause. I feel my development is slightly ahead of his at the moment, mainly because I've castled. And for that reason, I don't mind exchanging one of his developed pieces. So all these exchanges he's making, like now he's gotten both of his knights exchanged, that kind of highlights the fact that he's behind in development here. And actually, if he's not careful on this next move, I will have some nice tactics available. And if you want to think ahead, think about what you would do if white castled in this position. That's a logical move. He may be considering that very move right now, and he does play it. So I'll give you guys a few seconds to think about this, but how should I respond to castling? Okay, if you had in mind an undefended piece concept and you were thinking about the first video, I bet you focused in on that bishop on c4. That's a loose piece right here. We know this diagonal's weakened too. That's been something that's been going on the entire game. So the move that I have here is queen d4 check, which is a nice triple fork. A check on his king, an attack on his bishop, and an attack on his rook on a1. And I would say that this was set up because of our superior development and also because of his looseness in the position, more so the looseness that he suffers here. not having a great defense on this diagonal. That is one danger of the King's Gambit, f4 on move 2. So here I have a pleasant choice. I can take his bishop or his rook. I think I'll probably take the rook and be greedy. If queen takes bishop, he might have pawn to d3. Although even there, I think I would come out ahead. But let's take the rook. I'm just checking to make sure that I don't run into any problems on f7, because that would be a vulnerable square. I could also think about knight f2 check, but knight f2 check, he can sacrifice his rook for the knight, and that limits the amount of material that I win. So let's go ahead and just chop that guy. I think white was in a little too much of a hurry to castle in this one. I think they were focused on castling short, and that led to the deterioration of their position very quickly. They maybe should have played d3 and tried to get this bishop out, perhaps to d2. So my next move, a move that would really help me coordinate, would be to move this light square bishop. So if I get a chance, I'm going to play bishop to e6 and offer a trade, bishop for bishop. That would result in a weakening of my pawn structure. I might have to end up with two double isolated pawns in the middle on e6 and e5. But given that I'm a rook ahead now, I am more than willing to make that concession if it means reducing his attacking potential. Okay, so queen h5, aggressive move. He is putting 3 attackers on the f7 square. His queen, his bishop, and his rook. They're all trained on f7. And I only have 2 defenders at the moment, my king and my rook. So I want to respond to that. There's a few good options I see. One is knight to d6. That would be a good move because it attacks the bishop on c4 and also defends f7 at the same time. But I really like this bishop e6 move. In the context of coordination, which is what we're focusing on in this video, I like that because it blocks his bishop, it develops my last remaining piece, and it connects my rooks together. I'll feel much more happy. I'll feel much happier when these rooks are coordinated, connected, protecting each other. And also when I have my last piece out and into the game. So that's what I'll do. And again, knight d6 was not a bad move. I just think this one's even better. If I were him, I would avoid an exchange. Many of you will know this, but if you're behind, you're down in a position, the worst thing you can do is continue exchanging blindly and allow your opponent to just get into a war of attrition. You have to preserve your remaining attacking forces if you want a chance to get back in the game most of the time. So if I were him, I would play bishop to d3. Yeah, and he does. That's a good move. So if I move my knight, I may be opening up an attack on the h7 square. I could play knight f6, which would attack his queen and also defend h7, but I am a little fearful of rook takes f6. So I don't want to go down that route. Even though I could take his bishop with check, I think his rook would return to f1. So you know what I'm going to play here? I'm just going to play f5. Just defend my knight. This does expose my king a little bit, and it undefends my bishop on e6, so I need to be aware of that. But I don't see anything devastating he can do in reply, so I like f5. Blocking the diagonal. And I feel my position is well coordinated. Meanwhile, he has trouble getting this bishop out. There's no safe square for that piece to go to. And he's down a rook, so it's very tough for him now. I mean, he is just losing, but even when you're in a difficult or losing position like this, if you're white, if you're really wanting to practice your game, there's ways you can try to extract some educational or instructive value from a position like this. You know, he might set himself a mini goal. Like one thing you want to do when you're really having a hard time in a position is just set yourself a mini goal. Even if the goal is, I'm just going to try to survive 5 more moves, or I'm going to play the next 5 moves without dropping something else. So c3, okay, that's a solid move. He's defending his b4 pawn a bit better. He might be thinking in terms of trying to trap my queen. I'm going to put my queen on a2. This helps defend my bishop on e6. I also get in out of any potential discovered attacks of my queen on a1. I'd like to bring my queen back to d5. I think that would be a good move just to regain some influence with this queen. It's not just far-flung in the corner. It's more centralized. It helps guard e6 and e4 from that square. It would attack his bishop on d3. That would be a nicely coordinated move, queen d5. Also, I like that I'm opening up options of bishop c4 to try to trade off his light square bishop. Okay, h3. Tactical mistake for him. And if you want to try to figure out what black should do against this, you can pause your video now. Black to move and win material. Okay, if you said knight g3, you are correct. So I didn't mention that this was an undefended piece, but I probably should have. And I just kind of took it for granted a little bit later. But yeah, that piece was somewhat vulnerable. And the h2 pawn was the only thing preventing the knight from coming in with the fork. So unfortunately for him, he does fall victim to this now. And we'll see if he decides to play on in this position, but I wouldn't be surprised if he resigned. Okay, I'll just take his pawn on g4. Now I'm opening up an attack on his rook on f1. So he trades. Let's take with this rook. Again, even though we're completely winning, it's really nice that I've moved my light square bishop so I can seamlessly recapture with this rook. That's where it belongs. So undefended pawn on g4. Let's just pick that off. We're up a lot of material, but there's no reason for us to rush or make any sort of mistake now. So I'm not going to be moving at light speed. I think I'll still try to get my queen back over to d5. There may be faster ways to win this. You can see he's still thinking in terms of trying to keep my queen out of the game. So just go queen b3, attack his undefended bishop. If allowed, I think I'll try to get my queen over to h3, assuming he moves this bishop, because I see a checkmate in a couple moves that I would have. Yeah, and he plays bishop e4. And here I've got a few different mates in two. Let's just do this one. Okay, and now we have rook f8, or rook f1 rather, checkmate. Okay, so how about we go analyze this game for a minute? I'll flip the board around. And two things we're going to be talking about. One, piece coordination, because that's our topic of today. And the other concept, undefended pieces, which we were discussing in the last video. So he plays the King's Gambit. If you have trouble with undefended pieces, I would not recommend playing this opening, because already on move 2, white is offering a pawn. I wouldn't say this is an undefended piece error, though, because the King's Gambit is just an opening that is playable for white. It's a risky opening, but it's playable, so I'm not going to criticize f4. I could take the pawn on f4, but there's a lot of ways white can play and try to gain compensation. And I said I wanted to focus on piece coordination, getting my pieces out quickly, not spending too much time on pawn moves and individual piece operations. So I like bishop c5. Now, if you're thinking d6 is a good move, which it's not a bad move, compare the position I got into the game to the position I would get if black played d6. This also defends e5, but we're blocking in this bishop. Try to avoid this scenario, if possible, because bishops often get blocked in by d-pawns or e-pawns, and often it's needlessly so. I see many games from beginning players where they just do this and they're kind of just voluntarily doing it. Try to get your bishops out. Along the same lines, I wouldn't recommend fianchettoing your bishops too often. And for those who don't know what a fianchetto is if you push a knight pawn, usually up just one square, and then try to develop a bishop to a long diagonal. I wouldn't mess around with that too much if you're an improving player. Some coaches may disagree with this, but I think you should focus on developing more classically, aka having your bishops out in the center like this, before you move on to concepts like the fianchetto. Because classical development, you can do so more quickly generally because you've pushed your center pawns. Fianchettos require moving your wing pawns, and you get into territory where you have to judge whether that's worth it for you or not. So here I played bishop c5. The trap I was alluding to is if he takes on e5 now, he runs into queen h4 check. This is disastrous for white because I'm forking his king and his pawn on e4. And if he blocks with the g-pawn, which is the best move, I can take on e4, and guess what? Undefended piece problem for him. Rook on h1 is hanging after he moves his king. Black is winning already. And, oh, if he were to move his king to e2, he just loses immediately. Queen takes e4 mate. So bishop c5, it's a free developing move because he can't take this pawn on e5. And he seemed to know that. He played knight f3, and now I play d6. So nicely coordinated, my bishop and pawn. My bishop is happy because it's outside of the pawn chain. He played bishop c4, good move. I went knight c6. And already this move a3, I was mentioning that you can get into trouble if you make too many pawn moves in the opening. I think this move is too abstract for his position right now. There might be something to be said for controlling the b4 square, but it's too early for him to commit to a single pawn move like that. He'd be better off playing knight c3 directly or pawn to d3. I wouldn't mind that pawn move because it defends the bishop and opens his dark square bishop. Those would be two more constructive moves. a3 I do not like. So a3, and I just focus on development. So I've developed 3 pieces, and it only took 1 move for each piece. I'm not worrying about moving multiple pieces unless there's a real compelling reason to do so. Here I was talking about how I was either planning on castling or playing bishop g4. I think either move is good. I just castled. And as luck would have it, after b4, another pawn move, bishop b6, knight d5, he committed an undefended piece error, undefended pawn error. He let me take on e4. So this move, knight d5, just perfectly hits the 2 concepts we've discussed. And it shows you how common it is that this player, I think he was 1155, made this knight d5 move because he's committing 2 sins. He's leaving the pawn on e4 undefended, and he's moving the same piece twice in the opening. So if he had played a move like with this bishop, maybe bishop b2 or d3 and maybe bishop d2 later, d2 is not a great square for the bishop, but for the sake of argument, we'll just say that. That would have been more constructive for his position. So knight d5, and then I took on e4. He's trading. You can see the effect of him having traded the pieces that he's already developed. I was talking about how I didn't mind trading now because I'm a pawn ahead, and every trade that he does in the middle highlights the fact that he's behind in development, like he hasn't got this bishop out. And now it was opened up for this tactic, queen d4 check, forking all 3. And I won't talk too much about the rest because I think I kind of did it justice in the game. But even here, bishop e6 was a nice move for coordination purposes, connecting my rooks. I didn't want to delay that development any further. And anytime you can develop a piece and also attack or defend something, that's great. So the fact that I was able to develop this piece, defend f7, and attack his bishop on c4, I think is a perfect move. Yeah, and ended up winning. He fell for that fork. Okay, let's search for another game. We're going to do the same thing. I'm hoping I can get a maybe a white game too. We'll see. And one thing I neglected to mention in the last video, but I talked about it in the comments to the undefended piece video, if you have trouble with any of these concepts and you don't think you're capable of going an entire game without leaving a piece undefended, or you're not capable of coordinating your pieces right now in their entirety, that is totally fine. In fact, I would expect that for most of the people watching this video. So it's okay to set yourself mini goals of playing, let's say, 5 moves where you're practicing these principles, or 10 moves, like telling yourself, I'm going to go 10 moves without hanging a piece or moving the same piece twice, unless it's clearly good to do so. That's totally fine, and work your way up, just like your weight training, just like you're in the gym. You know, you're not going to start benching 300 pounds if you've never stepped into the gym before, provided you're, you know, not like a ridiculously strong person. No, you're going to start with some more manageable weight and work your way up. Chess is just like that. Okay, so we're playing a Sicilian in this game. This is a 1268. He's played d6. And I'm not going to criticize too many pawn moves in the opening like this because, again, this is standard theory. I'm going to go knight c3. Normally I would play d4, but I'm just going to focus on quick development, getting my pieces into the game ASAP. He played knight c6. Let's go bishop b5. Normally, I'm not in favor of playing bishop b5 in the Sicilian, but it's kind of with tempo because I can threaten to take his bishop. Let's castle now. Just quickly getting our king to safety. I will play a pawn move with this d-pawn if I get the chance. And given the way he's played it, I kind of like pushing d4 again. I wasn't sure if I was going to make this move, but let's do it. If he takes me, I'm happy to recapture with my knight, even though it means moving the same piece twice. I like it because I get my knight centralized. Also, I'm offering to trade for his piece, one of his already developed pieces. He plays knight f6. He is eyeing my e4 pawn, but I have that defended by my knight on c3. So if you guys were thinking about this position for white, what moves would you consider? If it were me, I'm considering moves with my dark square bishop. And in the Sicilian from the white side, usually this dark square bishop is best off on either e3 or g5. f4 is not a good square generally because e5 could fork the knight and the bishop. d2 could block the queen's defense of d4. So I like e3. I'm going to play that because it overprotects this knight on d4. And I like the look of that. He's playing well so far. I like how he's played it. So he plays a6. I'm not happy about having to move my bishop again, but I think I will, because I don't really want to take when he's able to take back with his pawn. That would really strengthen his central influence if he's able to do that. So I'm going to tuck this bishop away on e2. I would give him an A for how he's playing this game so far. If he moves this dark square bishop, I like his game even further. Yeah, bishop e7. Okay, let's play queen d2. Let's just get our queen up. We've already developed all of our minor pieces, so I'm happy like that, and they're all centralized. Now I want to coordinate my rooks. He'll probably castle here. Oh, he plays queen c7 instead. Okay. Now, here, since we're both doing a good job of coordinating, and this guy doesn't seem to have too many problems with his development, I could start getting into more complicated plans. Like one plan that is pretty good here is f4. But I'm going to play my rook to the center first. One thing with rooks, don't feel like you have to commit them too soon in positions. Like let's say you've developed all your minor pieces, you've brought your queen out as I have, your rooks are coordinated. You don't have to feel like you immediately have to get a rook to the center. Some people make that mistake. Because I found with rooks, you're sometimes just kind of guessing like where the rook will be good. Like here I'm taking an educated guess that the rook will be useful on the d-file, which is probably not a bad guess because he has a pawn on d6. But I might have been justified in playing some other moves. And here I'm going to play f4. This is the plan I was referring to. This is a good move for white. I gain control over the e5 square. It might allow me to play pawn to e5 in the future. Okay, and he's played rook c8. Yeah, no, lots of praise for my opponent. I really like the way Lichi is playing this. All of his minor pieces were developed in one go. He hasn't wasted too many moves with pawns, only c5, d6, e6, and capturing my pawn on d4, and a6. All these pawn moves are useful. They control squares. There's no pawn that's like wildly out of position for him. I haven't moved this rook yet, but I like this rook on the f-file, so I'm not going to disturb it. What could I do here? I could get really creative and start pushing a pawn on this wing. I could play bishop to f3. He might move this knight. He might go knight a5 and into c4 in the future, so I want to be aware of that. I kind of like the idea of playing f5. I think I will play f5. Let's just see. I just want to put him to the test. I am giving away the e5 square, so it wouldn't be a bad idea for him to jump his knight into e5. But I've got this pawn well protected. I want to apply pressure here. We'll see how he responds to it. But Lichi, if you're watching this, good job. You're doing a great job for the first 12, 13 moves or so. He plays e5, attacks my knight. I'm going to retreat this knight to b3. Not sure I liked e5 so much for him because it does weaken his control over d5. So I like the fact that I have 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces trained on that d5 square. And also I have some pressure on his d6 pawn too, which is a backward pawn, meaning it doesn't have a pawn on either side of it to protect it. Now, this kind of gets into some Sicilian strategy as well, but this d5 square, what's the only piece that's guarding it for him? It's the knight on f6, right? So I would love to get my knight into d5. But I don't want to get focused on the individual operation with that knight. Like knight d5 is great, but if he can just trade for it, there's no point in really doing that. So what would be a potentially good plan for me to ensure that this knight ends up on d5 when he can't trade for it? In other words, how can I secure d5 and he can't chase me away or trade for it? If you said bishop g5, good job, and that's what I'm going to play. So I'm moving this piece again, but we're not neglecting any other piece, so I think it's fine to move this bishop again. And my threat, my positional threat, is to take his knight and make way for this knight to come into d5. Also, by taking here on f6, we may be deflecting his bishop from defending the d6 pawn. So there might be some auxiliary benefit in that I enable queen takes d6. But yeah, no major coordination issues for either side. He plays bishop e8. Probably a good move because that allows his rook to help defend here. Only possible because he has some decent coordination. He's made way for his rook to come d8 and open up that possibility. I'm still going to go ahead with my plan. I'm going to take. And on the next move, the knight is hopping in once he recaptures. I think one thing he's noticing now is that when my knight does come in, assuming he's captured with his bishop here, his queen won't be able to support his bishop. So now I'll bring my knight in with tempo on his queen. His queen either has to go to d7 or b8. Yeah. And now I'm noticing his major pieces. They're a long ways away from his king side. And I didn't really move this knight to d5 with the intention of exchanging, but I am going to make an exception in this case because I see that after I take on f6, he'll have this undefended pawn there, which is pretty hard for him to defend given his current piece arrangement. So you guys might see where I'm headed with this, but I'm going to take and then I'm going to move my queen all the way into h6. And this pawn is a goner. I don't think he can defend this pawn. He needs his queen somewhere a little closer. Another attacking move I might have here is lifting one of my rooks up to the third rank. So maybe I'll use this f1 rook because I like how this rook is eyeing his pawn on d6. So maybe since this rook hasn't done anything in the game yet, other than just castle, coordination-wise it might be good for me to use that. Now in playing queen h6, I did leave a couple things undefended, like c2 is undefended. Also my e4 pawn is undefended. Same with a2. A move he could think about playing right now is knight b4, because that would attack both c2 and a2. But given the weakness of his king, I'm not concerned about that. In fact, I think after rook f3, his position is just resignable. So he just has some serious problems with his king in this position, simply speaking. And actually, bishop e8 has hurt his defensive possibilities now, as it transpired, because his rook can't assist in the defense of the king so easily. So the more I look at this, the more I'm thinking I just won't even bother taking this pawn on f6. I'll just move my rook up is my next plan and just get it over to g3 or h3. I think for him, I don't want to write his position off too quickly, but this is going to be very tough for him. For him, that move 13, e5, that was not such a good move. Yeah, that gave me the d5 square to work with. Okay, he gives a check on a7. I'm just going to move my king. Rook f2 would block the check, but that would be poor for my coordination because that's the rook I have had aspirations to go up to f3 with. So I don't want to just block him. So I'll play king h1. Fortunately for me, his rook can't really, or his queen rather, can't join in the defense of his king. I saw a while ago that if he plays queen to e3, I can just take his queen. So he's hard-pressed to defend. Yeah, he plays knight b4. So I like the thinking in that, attacking c2 and a2. But unfortunately for him, I think it's just going to be too little too late. He did block my rook from coming to d3, so I don't have that rook lift, but I can coordinate using this other rook. And this is an educated attacking move. I'm recognizing that I'm leaving these two pawns hanging, but I know that I have bigger fish to fry. I'm going after black's king. And I don't see a defense for him. I'm threatening mate in 2, rook g3 check, king h8, queen g7 mate. There's not much he can do about that. If he plays king h8, I can play queen f8 mate directly. So this is going to be over in a matter of moves. After this, I'll take a quick look at this game with you guys, and then I wanted to discuss some d4, d5 scenarios, so d-pawn lines. And he resigned. Pretty good game, though, by him as far as the opening goes. So let's take a look at this one. So I opened with e4. We played the Sicilian. And I said I wasn't going to criticize pawn moves played that are just book theory. So d6, it's a completely good move. It helps him control the center. Likewise, white can play d4. d4 is the main line move here. That's what I usually play in this position. And after take, the knight gets here. We're breaking some principles like making multiple pawn moves, moving the same piece twice, but this knight ends up on a good square. Mainline theory, we're not too worried about it. But for the purposes of this video, I just wanted to develop quickly. So knight c3, he played knight c6. I brought my bishop out. He brought his bishop to d7. I castled. e6. So the pawn moves that he's making are all centrally oriented. Like the difference between a move like e6 and a move like h6 can't be overestimated, or overstated, I mean. Like e6 is great because that facilitates piece development for him. He's letting his bishop come out here. Also, he's controlling a key center square. A move like h6, which a lot of beginning players play just to control the g5 square, that's far too of a one-dimensional move. Usually it's played only to stop something from coming in there. It's not facilitating your piece development in any way. It's not combining goals. We like moves that combine goals in the opening, like developing a piece and attacking, making a pawn move and opening an avenue. Moves like that. So in that sense, e6 is a good move. I played d4. He took. I took with the knight. So I'm offering to exchange, but I don't mind that because I have a slight development lead. I've already castled, and I have one more minor piece than him. So if he were to just go willy-nilly exchanging pieces, the fact that he exchanges, that makes my lead in development more pronounced because now he has no pieces out, and I have 2, and I'm castling. Okay, so if you're behind in development, you shouldn't be trading too much. You should be focusing on developing your remaining pieces. So I like that he played knight f6 here. I brought the bishop to e3. I was discussing how this bishop usually comes to either e3 or g5 in this opening. So here he played a6. I did go back. Going by what I had just mentioned, it might make some sense for me to take since I am a little ahead in development. But I would just fear that he would take with the pawn. And I know from experience that having these 3 pawns to fight against from the white side in the Sicilian is kind of difficult. He can often push your minor pieces back with them in the center. So this is maybe a point in the game where I'm slightly embarrassed for having played bishop b5. Not embarrassed, but I haven't been able to take on c6 favorably, so bishop b5 does seem like a slight waste of time. But still, it's fine. I played the bishop back to e2. He went bishop e7, very good. I played queen d2, connecting the rooks. He played queen c7. I probably would have castled if I were him, but queen c7 is perfectly fine. That's the square his queen is probably going to want to end up on anyways. So I played rook d1. I like using this rook for d1 rather than rook fd1 because if we were to play rook fd1, we would essentially be saying that we think this rook is going to be good on a1, b1, or c1. And given that I haven't moved any of these pawns, that seems far-fetched. I don't think the rook is going to be great on those squares. So rook ad1, and this leaves me options with my f-pawn too, and I played f4. And looking at the respective positions, I think we're both doing great as far as our coordination. I'm very centralized. All my minor pieces are working together. The knights are positioned in the center. The bishops have sort of dual-purpose diagonals. They can be active on both the king side and the queen side. My rooks are pretty well placed. One's behind a pawn that has just moved and maybe has aspirations to move even further. The other one's on a half-open file where it might target one of my opponent's pawns. And for him, if we just flip the board around, good development. He has one extra center pawn than me, so he's controlling all 4 of these squares. That looks great. The next step for him will probably be to move the rooks to the center, which is what he did. So good stuff happening. He played rook a(c8). And here I played f5. I mean, given that this guy's playing at a pretty high level so far, I'm now having to resort to more plan type things to really get an advantage rather than just like exploiting his undefended pieces or taking advantage of some egregious error. So I played f5 to see how he would respond, and I think e5 is a positional mistake for him. I would have preferred him to jump his knight into that square. That would be a better option, because now his knight is pretty secure here. It can't be chased by one of my pawns because I've already played f4, f5. I've already gone past the e5 square. Maybe his knight can get into c4 or g4 down the road. His pawn on e6 is sufficiently defended. If I take, he would take back. And my knight is looking at that pawn, but with his bishop here, it coordinates nicely in defense. And also I would have to take on an isolated pawn myself on e4 if I wanted to do this. So he played e5, and I did not take on c6. Because again, if I take on c6, he could take back. Although I am noticing that if he takes back with the pawn, he would have an undefended pawn in this position, which, if you spotted it already, good job. It's bishop takes a6. I could take that and hit his rook. So, actually, knight takes c6 might not be that bad, but he could maybe just take with the bishop and add another defender to the d5 square. So I'm fairly satisfied that I played instead the retreating move, knight b3. Now, if he were thinking prophylactically about my threat, maybe he would consider ways to prevent bishop g5 or somehow bring another piece to defend the d5 square. Like a move he could think about is h6, which would preempt bishop g5. It might be a slightly risky move, though, because I think I might have some possibilities of sacrificing this bishop for 2 pawns to open up his king. So I'm liking White's game here. I think I just have this straightforward plan of playing bishop g5, and I don't think Black is that much worse here, but I have a clear plan, and I'm not sure what he should do. So he played rook fd8. I went bishop to g5. And this bishop e8 move, I like the idea behind it, defending the pawn with his rook again, but unfortunately it just looks like his king side becomes too exposed once I trade and jump the knight in. So compare in the last game, I had an opponent that played knight c3 to d5. Compare what I've done this game to what my opponent in that last game did. First of all, I played knight d5 in this game much later, like move 17. Last game it was probably not even move 10 yet, and he had played that move. Also, when he did it, my opponent in the last game, he dropped the pawn on e4, and he wasn't playing knight d5 with tempo. Here I'm playing knight d5 with tempo, hitting his queen and hitting his bishop. So I'm in fact like gaining time and improving my knight, rather than just willy-nilly jumping the knight into the center without attacking anything in particular. So this is a much better example of moving the same piece twice than in the previous game. And by the way, all these concepts I'm talking about as far as coordination and moving the same piece twice, as the game goes along, you're, of course, going to be moving pieces multiple times. It's just in the opening and early middle game, I see beginning players moving the same piece twice way too often. So that's why I've been harping on it constantly in this video. You shouldn't ever second guess moving the same piece twice like in a late middle game. That would be kind of ridiculous. So he went here and I took. Yeah, and this attack is too strong for him. I think he's losing already. Mainly thanks to this rook lift. And it kind of seems like everything came together, and that's what's so remarkable when you look at games of good players. I mean, even players much, much better than myself. When I review Grandmaster games, I'm always just fascinated by how it seems like their pieces come together in the right moment. But that's just a function of having good coordination. Like the fact that I have rook f3 available here, it's not just blind luck. It's the fact that I've been doing everything correctly in regards to coordination in this video. I played f4, I castled early on, I played f4, f5, I made some attacking gestures against his king, I weakened his pawns. That paved the way for rook f3 to be possible. So it's by design, and that's how you guys want to play too. Okay, before I wrap up this video, I wanted to talk about a specific scenario. So, actually, let me do this from the white side. So I was mentioning the special relationship between knights and c-pawns. And I'm going to use the queen side example of this because king side it doesn't happen as much. So let's say we play a game and it starts out with d4 and black responds with d5. Now in this position, beginners are often confused why the move knight c3 for white is considered to be kind of a mistake. They think, well, this is a developing move, what's the problem with it? But in d-pawn openings, what usually happens is white wants to put pressure on black's d5 pawn, and playing the move knight c3 really hampers that goal because you're blocking your c2 pawn. The best sort of attacks are usually developed with a pawn in front and the pieces behind it. Think of something as simple as a pawn storm. When you're pawn storming your opponent, by definition, you're pushing your pawns towards their king, and you're not doing it with the goal of like checkmating them with your pawns. You're doing it with the goal of having the pawns lead the way, do the dirty work, create weaknesses, and have your pieces in a supporting role behind it to really come in and finish things off. So here, knight c3 kind of gets it backwards a little bit. The knight is blocking the pawn. Yes, we're attacking d5, but d5 is already defended by the queen. And it's hard to see how we're going to get further attackers going with having played knight c3. On the contrary, if we play c4, the queen's gambit, and then follow with knight c3 on the next move, assuming black doesn't take us, that is a more harmonious way of continuing because then we'll have two attackers on d5. So let's just say black plays e6 and we play knight c3. So we've doubled the amount of attackers we have defended, or we have attacking here. Also, a lot of times you end up getting queen b3 too, especially if this light square bishop's developed too early. And we're letting our pawn lead the way. I think I mentioned this in a previous video too, one of my blitz videos, but they often say that having a pawn on c4 and a knight on c3 represents a happy marriage, and having the knight in front and the pawn behind is an unhappy marriage. Okay, so if you're white and you play d4 and you're trying to develop your knight, I would really recommend getting the pawn to c4 in front of it, like so. Same thing for black too. So let's say we flip this position around. We're in the queen's gambit declined opening. Black plays knight f6. This move's perfectly fine. I wouldn't worry about it on the king side as much because then you're getting into situations where, f5, it's possible in some lines, but playing f5 because you want to get your knight to f6, I would say is not as good. So if you want to think about it in terms of pressuring a center pawn, it's best to push your c-pawn and get your knight behind it when you're pressuring a center pawn. You don't just want to do it just to do it. So f5 would not be that good of a move here. Knight f6 is perfectly fine. Let's say white plays knight f3. Again, white doesn't mind blocking the f-pawn, the forget about it pawn. You want to forget about moving that pawn too early. Black can go bishop e7. Let's say white plays, we'll just say bishop f4. Black castles. White plays e3. I do like this setup for black because in d4, d5 openings, I think it's good for black to complete their kingside development quickly and then focus on how to arrange the queenside pieces. This is doubly true for the queen's gambit declined, which is this opening. So here, a common move I see, and I've had so many students do this when they first come to me, is they'll play knight c6. They'll play knight c6 in this position. And I almost always tell them this is a slight mistake. This is not a good move for coordination because you're blocking your c-pawn. It develops a piece, so you're not moving, you're not spending a whole lot of time on pawn moves here, but with these closed positions that are possible out of d4, oftentimes you have to think more in terms of your piece and pawn coordination rather than just your piece coordination, which is more applicable to e4 openings. So I think knight c6 is a mistake, and it would be a better idea to play c5 and then put the knight behind it. So even though this introduces a lot of pawn tension, black has a lot of stuff defended in the center, so they can afford to play c5 and put the knight behind it. Or if you want, another good strategy and this goes against some previous advice, but another good strategy is to fianchetto this light square bishop. This is one opening where I would give you permission, if you were black, to adopt a setup like this. And that's because your light square bishop doesn't have a lot of good conventional ways to develop, because you played pawn to e6. So developing it to b7, and maybe later hoping that these pawns clarify and you get an open diagonal, that's perfectly fine here. And then you would be even more justified in playing c5 because you have this pawn on b6 defending it. You could also, if you want, develop the knight to d7 so as not to block the pawn. Practicing good coordination again, like having a pawn that we know is likely to fight for the center being uninhibited and free to advance to the square it needs to without worrying about having a knight in the way. So that's just one very specific thing having to do with the queenside knights and the c-pawns. It's more relevant to closed and semi-closed positions, usually positions that arise from d4. So, okay, I'm going to wrap this video up here. I hope you guys enjoyed this discussion of piece coordination. So remember to not spend too much time on individual operations with your pieces, especially early in the opening. Only make pawn moves if it facilitates your piece development, or if you think you have a really compelling reason to make a pawn move. You think it will help you fight for the center or take away some key square that your opponent wants to use. And really try to strive for harmonious positions where you have multiple pieces working together and you're not relying on one or two pieces to do everything for you. Okay, and always, always, always be aware of your undefended pieces from video 1. So thank you guys for watching. If you have any feedback on this part in the series, please leave me a comment. And thanks again, guys. I'll talk to you later. Bye.